The Great War changed everything, not just borders or empires, but the very nature of how human beings could destroy each other. Between 1914 and 1918, the world witnessed weapons so horrific that they redefined what terror looked like on a battlefield. Some of these instruments of death were so effective at causing mass casualties that entire divisions would vanish in minutes. Others were designed specifically to inflict the most agonizing deaths imaginable, leaving survivors with nightmares that lasted decades. What you're about to discover are the 10 most terrifying weapons that emerged from the trenches of World War I. These weren't just tools of war, they were harbingers of a new age where technology and human cruelty merged into something far worse than anything previous generations had ever witnessed. By the time this conflict ended, over 17 million people were dead, and many of those deaths came at the hands of weapons that seemed pulled straight from humanity's darkest imagination. The soldiers who faced these weapons often described them in letters home, though military censors frequently blocked the most disturbing details. Those who survived encounters with these instruments of terror carried physical and psychological scars that medicine couldn't heal. Recovery teams discovered scenes so horrific that many refused to speak about what they found, even years after the war ended. Today, we're going to walk through each of these weapons, from the relatively conventional to the absolutely nightmarish. You'll understand why veterans of this war looked different when they came home, why so many never spoke about what they experienced, and how these innovations in death forever changed the way wars would be fought. Some of these weapons were banned by international treaties after the war, deemed too inhumane even by military standards. Others became the foundation for even more terrifying weapons in future conflicts. But before we dive into this list, you need to understand something crucial about World War I. This wasn't a war fought between armies meeting on open fields with honor and tradition. This was industrial warfare, where factories churned out death on an unprecedented scale. Engineers and scientists competed to create more efficient ways to kill, and soldiers became test subjects for weapons that pushed the boundaries of human suffering. Let's begin with number 10 on our list: poison gas. When the first chlorine gas attacks began in 1915, they introduced a completely new dimension of horror to warfare. Unlike bullets or shells that killed quickly, gas was designed to create maximum terror and suffering. Soldiers would see the greenish-yellow clouds drifting across no man's land and know that death was coming slowly. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Gas masks became essential equipment, but early versions were primitive and unreliable. Men would frantically try to seal their faces while watching comrades around them choking on their own blood as the gas burned through their lungs. The sound of hundreds of soldiers simultaneously gasping for air while their respiratory systems dissolved created an atmosphere of panic that could break entire units. What made poison gas particularly terrifying wasn't just how it killed, but how it transformed the battlefield into something alien and threatening. Every breeze could carry death. Every crater could hide lingering traces of chemical agents. Soldiers developed an almost supernatural fear of the wind itself, knowing that weather conditions could determine whether they lived or died that day. Moving to number 9, we encounter the flamethrower, a weapon that turned fire into a portable instrument of terror. The psychological impact of facing flames in combat cannot be overstated. Fire represents one of humanity's most primal fears, and weaponizing it created reactions that went beyond normal battlefield stress. German stormtroopers equipped with flamethrowers could clear entire trenches not just through the physical effects of the weapon, but through the sheer terror it inspired. Allied soldiers described the sound of approaching flamethrower teams as something that made their blood freeze. The distinctive hiss of pressurized fuel being ignited, followed by the roar of flames, announced a particularly horrible death for anyone caught in its path. The weapon's effective range was limited, but its psychological range extended much further. Entire sections of trenches would be abandoned when rumors spread that flamethrower units were operating in the area. Recovery teams later found positions that had been evacuated so quickly that soldiers left behind personal items, weapons, and equipment, rather than face the possibility of burning alive. Number 8 brings us to the machine gun. specifically the heavy water-cooled models that dominated the Western Front. While machine guns existed before World War I, their tactical employment during this conflict created killing fields unlike anything previously imagined. A single well-positioned machine gun could stop entire battalions, creating scenes of mass slaughter that defied comprehension. The Maxim gun and similar weapons could fire continuously for hours, cutting down advancing infantry like wheat before a scythe. The psychological effect on attacking forces was devastating. Soldiers would advance knowing that hundreds of their comrades had already been mowed down attempting the same assault. Yet military doctrine demanded they continue forward into certain death. These weapons created a new type of battlefield mathematics where human lives became expendable statistics. Commanders calculated acceptable casualty rates, knowing that machine gun positions would extract a predictable toll in blood. What made machine gun positions particularly nightmarish was their ability to create interlocking fields of fire. Multiple guns positioned across the battlefield could coordinate their deadly arcs, ensuring that no approach offered safety. Soldiers quickly learned to recognize the distinctive sound patterns of different machine gun types, knowing that each weapon had its own rhythm of death. Number 7 takes us into the realm of artillery, specifically the massive siege guns that could obliterate entire city blocks with a single shell. The German Big Bertha and similar weapons represented a new scale of destructive power that transformed warfare from a human endeavor into something more mechanical and impersonal. These weapons fired shells weighing hundreds of pounds across distances that seemed impossible. The psychological impact began long before the shells arrived. Soldiers could hear the distant rumble of the guns firing, then had agonizing seconds to contemplate their fate as the projectiles arced through the sky. The sound of incoming heavy artillery created a unique form of terror, a whistling shriek that grew louder as death approached. When these massive shells detonated, they didn't just kill soldiers, they erased them completely. Recovery teams often found nothing but crater-filled landscapes where entire companies had been positioned moments before. The sheer scale of destruction left survivors questioning their own mortality in ways that smaller weapons never could. Moving to number 6, we encounter the tank, a weapon that fundamentally changed how soldiers perceived protection and vulnerability on the battlefield. Early tanks were slow, unreliable, and often broke down before reaching enemy lines, but their psychological impact was immediate and profound. The first appearance of tanks at the Battle of Flers-Courcelette created scenes of panic among German forces who had never encountered anything like these metal beasts. The sight of armored vehicles crushing through barbed wire defenses and climbing over trenches while machine gun bullets bounced harmlessly off their hulls shattered the tactical assumptions that had dominated the war. Inside these early tanks, conditions were hellish for the crews. Temperatures could reach unbearable levels. Poisonous fumes filled the cramped compartments, and the noise was deafening. Tank crews developed their own unique form of combat stress, trapped inside metal coffins that could become furnaces if hit by enemy fire. Number 5 brings us to the trench mortar, a weapon specifically designed for the close-quarters horror of trench warfare. Unlike artillery that fired from distant positions, trench mortars operated at ranges where soldiers could see their targets clearly, making each shot intensely personal. These weapons lobbed explosive charges in high arcs, dropping death directly into enemy trenches with devastating accuracy. The psychological warfare began with the sound of the mortar firing, a distinctive thump that gave defending soldiers just enough warning to know that death was incoming, but not enough time to escape effectively. Trench mortars created a constant state of anxiety among frontline troops. Any moment of the day or night, explosive shells could rain down without warning. Soldiers developed an almost supernatural ability to distinguish between different types of incoming projectiles based on sound alone, but this knowledge only intensified their fear rather than providing comfort. At number 4, we find the sniper rifle, a weapon that personalized death in ways that mass killing devices could not. Snipers turned the battlefield into a deadly game of patience and precision, where a single mistake could result in instant death from an invisible enemy. The psychological impact of sniper activity extended far beyond the actual casualties they inflicted. Entire sections of trenches could be paralyzed by the presence of a single, skilled marksman. Soldiers would refuse to show themselves above the parapet, knowing that enemy eyes were constantly watching for any sign of movement. Snipers created an atmosphere of paranoia that infected entire units. Every movement had to be calculated, every exposure minimized. The knowledge that death could arrive without warning from hundreds of yards away fundamentally changed how soldiers moved, ate, slept, and fought. Number 3 introduces us to the submarine, specifically the German U-boats that turned the world's oceans into hunting grounds for human prey. These underwater predators created a new form of warfare where civilian vessels became legitimate targets, and the ocean itself became an instrument of terror. The psychological impact of submarine warfare extended far beyond military targets. Merchant sailors and passengers on civilian ships lived with the constant knowledge that death could rise from the depths at any moment. The sinking of vessels like the Lusitania demonstrated that traditional concepts of civilian immunity had been abandoned. For those who survived submarine attacks, the experience created lasting trauma. Floating in lifeboats surrounded by burning oil and debris, watching ships disappear beneath the waves in minutes, survivors faced a type of helplessness that land-based warfare rarely produced. Number 2 brings us to the dreaded barbed wire, a seemingly simple invention that transformed no man's land into an impassable death trap. While it might seem mundane compared to poison gas or flamethrowers, barbed wire created some of the most horrific scenes of the entire war. Soldiers caught in these metal tangles became helpless targets, unable to advance or retreat while enemy machine gunners picked them off at leisure. The psychological horror of barbed wire lay not just in its ability to stop attacks, but in how it prolonged suffering. Wounded soldiers would hang suspended in the wire for hours or even days, crying out for help that could never come. Their screams echoed across no man's land, creating a soundtrack of agony that haunted both sides of the conflict. Recovery teams discovered bodies so thoroughly entangled in wire that they had to cut the metal away piece by piece. Some soldiers were found months later, their remains still caught in the same positions where they had died, testament to the wire's ability to hold its victims long after death had claimed them. And finally, at number 1, the most terrifying weapon of World War I was not a single device, but a combination of all these horrors working together in the phenomenon known as the creeping barrage. This tactic involved coordinating artillery, machine guns, poison gas, and infantry attacks into a moving wall of death that advanced across the battlefield like a mechanical apocalypse. The creeping barrage represented the ultimate expression of industrial warfare's ability to systematize mass killing. Artillery shells would pound enemy positions while poison gas drifted through the trenches. Machine guns would sweep the ground clean of any survivors, while flamethrower teams eliminated the last pockets of resistance. The entire process moved forward with clockwork precision, leaving nothing alive in its wake. Soldiers facing a creeping barrage described it as watching their own deaths approach in slow motion. The wall of explosions, fire, and gas would advance at a predetermined pace, giving defenders just enough time to contemplate their fate, but not enough to escape it. The sound alone was enough to drive men insane, a continuous roar of destruction that seemed to go on forever. These 10 weapons didn't just change how wars were fought, they fundamentally altered humanity's relationship with violence and death. The Great War introduced a level of mechanized slaughter that previous generations could never have imagined. The weapons we've examined today created not just casualties, but an entirely new understanding of what human beings could do to each other when technology and hatred combined. The survivors of these weapons carried their trauma far beyond the battlefield. Veterans returned home with invisible wounds that no medical treatment could heal. The weapons of World War I didn't just kill bodies, they shattered minds and souls in ways that echoed through generations. Perhaps most disturbing of all, these innovations in death became the foundation for even more terrifying weapons in the conflicts that followed. The Great War truly earned its name, not just for its scale, but for the lasting horror it introduced to human warfare.